Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. By the way, someone the other day wrote me an email and said, who are the 70%ers? I said, what are you talking about? Who are the 70%ers? What do you even mean? And they're like, you start off every show saying, hey, 70%ers. It's, hey, Slater Crusaders. Sorry, I've been saying it for 10 years now, and I say it too quickly, perhaps. Hello, Slater Crusaders. Thank you for being here. Coming up at the end of the show, Professor Vincent Rackaniello is going to be here, of course, our virologist from Columbia University. My mom got the vaccine yesterday, so I got a ton of questions about the Moderna vaccine and the rollout and vaccinating kids. Is that a thing that we're even ever going to do? And safety questions, all that stuff. That's all coming up a little bit later in the program. In this segment, I want to make the point that Biden and the left are not interested in unity. They know what they needed and still need to do to unify the country. It's not rocket scientists, but they chose, not rocket scientist, it's Monday. It's not rocket science, but they chose not to. They chose not to. So don't buy their cry for unity. It's a trick, it's a trap, watch out. So we made the point a lot last week that if Biden really wanted unity, he would have done as Abraham Lincoln did in his second inaugural address and landed a couple punches on the right and the left, just like Lincoln landed some punches on the South and the North for their contribution to slavery and the Civil War. Right? Just like then, in the 1860s and prior, just like then, no one today is innocent in the state of our country, right? And he could have rebuked the right and rebuked the left for their identity politics and for defunding the police and the riots this summer. Violence begets violence, right? He could have landed a couple punches there, but of course he didn't. He said we're a racist country and systemically racist and white supremacy and domestic terrorists and all this stuff. It's not terribly unifying. And then one of the first things he did in office, and by the way, on Friday, our special this week is going to be about Biden's first executive orders. We're going to run through most of the big ones, or all the big ones. One of the first things he did was sign an executive order that allows boys to use girl locker rooms and play in girls' sports and force hospitals to perform sex change operations. So if you're a Catholic hospital who, I don't know, doesn't want to remove a perfectly functioning uterus from a woman with a mental disease, mental illness, you'll get sued. The hospital's gonna get sued because they don't want to perform a hysterectomy on right? Just like the Little Sisters of the Poor, just like the nuns didn't want to pay for birth control and they got taken to the Supreme Court twice by Biden's former boss. Okay, so unity, right? That's the unity that he's ushering in. So we talked a lot about that last week, and I bring all that up again to say that there is no end to the mental illness. There's no end to the derangement. There's no end to the hatred. There's no end to the jealousy. There's no end to the anger when you play the social justice game. Let me prove it. Or let me say what Biden was missing, obviously, from his speech as well. So in his speech, he quoted St. Augustine, and it was a weird wording. Like he didn't quote him exactly. He just mentioned him and then kind of did a different thing. And you're like, hopefully some red flags went up. Here's the moment.
Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth.
Okay. By the way, guys in New York, Augustine or Augustine? I need an answer on one of those. I'm going to go with Augustine. How about that? He says Augustine, I say Augustine, because he misquoted him. So Augustine of, so he mentions it, but then he doesn't really quote him. But he mentions him, but doesn't quote him. He then just lists off a bunch of nice sounding things, but he never actually quotes Augustine. So Augustine of Hippo was a theologian in North Africa. This is during the Roman Empire days. He was born around 350. He wrote a book, among others, called The City of God. Biden's quote is from that book. But he doesn't go on to the rest of the sentence. So the background of this book, The City of God. So 410 was the sacking of Rome by the Visigoths. The Visigoths was this kingdom to the west of the Roman Empire, which would be like today's Spain. Right? So the Visigoths came in and sacked Rome. These barbarians took over Rome. They invaded, they took over Rome, and everyone was shocked. How could this have happened? How could Rome have fallen to these barbarians? It was the first time in 800 years that a foreign enemy came in and took the city. So who did the people blame, or what did the people blame? The people of Rome blamed Christianity. They said that Rome fell because the people of Rome gave up the Roman religions and took up this wicked atheist religion known as Christianity. Back then, Christians were known as atheists because they did not worship the gods. So they were godless, right? So the Christians were the atheists back then. But anyway, so the Romans said it was the Christians' fault. The Christians' fault that the gods have abandoned us. So Augustine wrote this book. And he said, no, it's the worship of the pagan gods that Rome suffered the greatest calamity of all, and that's our moral corruption. And with the moral corruption that has overtaken the people of Rome, it was only a matter of time before our politics would fail and before the city would be invaded. And he made the argument that the reason Rome has lasted as long as it has is because of the Christian God. So I hope you can maybe see the point where I'm going here. Augustine said that the things that unite us, or I should say, Augustine did not say the things that unite us are the list that Biden gave: security, liberty, honor, truth. He said the things that unite a people is God. That's what unites us. So here's the real quote. And you'll see it's very different than what Biden, thinks, or at least said it means, but he could say whatever, and of course no one's gonna bother to look it up other than us. Again, so people of Rome, they're saying Rome was sacked because of Christianity, and here's part of the rebuttal. Let me start with this is the quote, the actual quote that Biden was referring to. They say that a people is an assemblage of reasonable beings bound together by a common agreement as to the object of their love. Then, in order to discover the character of any people, we have only to observe what they love. That's what Biden was sort of pretty close quoting, right? But he didn't go on. So let me read a couple highlights. The city of the ungodly, which did not obey the command of God, is void of true justice. Why didn't Biden say that? So the blessed life of man is God, of whom the sacred writings of the Hebrews say, blessed is the people whose God is the Lord. Miserable, therefore, is the people which is alienated from God. Now, I'm quoting these. You can agree with these or not. I'm not saying you have to agree with them. I agree with them. But even if you don't, if you're not a Christian or whatever, that's fine. My critique here is that Biden left this part out. That's the point. What's the point of quoting this guy, but they're not really quoting him? Last one. They who do not belong to this city of God shall inherit eternal misery. He then goes on and has a great section on what Christians think is the supreme good and evil versus what the ancient philosophers, or of his day, not so ancient, but what they believed was the ultimate good and evil. And he mentioned Cicero. Cicero wrote Consolation when his daughter died. He was so grief-stricken, Cicero. By the way, his second wife was so jealous of how much Cicero loved his daughter over her that she divorced him. That was his second divorce. But you didn't know that Cicero was divorced twice. A little Cicero gossip. That's your Us Weekly latest on Cicero. Divorced twice. Juicy gossip. So he was so grief-stricken when his daughter died. And Augustine said that Cicero couldn't cope with the difficulties of the world because the philosophers thought that the supreme good is in themselves. And Christians know that the supreme good is in him. And there's a massive difference between those two. But it's no different, right? Everything I've just said here, it's no different than the modern thought today. And I'll end here. This is one of the great revelations in my life. And if I spoke on a college campus, a progressive college campus, this would be one of my main points. There's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun. All the so-called progressive thoughts of today, right? People on the left, they think they're so smart, so original, so genius, so unique. All the ideas from the left today, they're from thousands of years ago. Same crap, retread, packaged, all shiny and new. A couple weeks ago on the show with Spencer Clavin, we talked about the Gracchi brothers. The Gracchi brothers were these populist Roman leaders in like 130 BC who proposed universal basic income. You thought Andrew Yang was the person who came up with that? Right? People think Andrew Yang is the first person who came up, well, let's just give money to everybody. Now the problem is Andrew Yang might think that Andrew Yang was the first person to come up with that. There's nothing new under the sun. All these ideas have been tried and failed before. And abandoning God is nothing new either. And trying to unite around other things that sound good. And it's something, but it's never enough. Our nation was founded on and can only survive if we unite around God. Very out of style to say that today. And I said it was weird that the world's greatest Catholic, Joe Biden, who the New York Times wrote an article this weekend praising him as the most religiously observant commander-in-chief in half a century. George W. Bush could not be called for comment. I said it's weird that he did not encourage the country to get back to our basics, right? Get back to our roots, unify around God. Isn't it weird that the world's greatest Catholic didn't take the time to do that? But he's also called it the Book of Palms. He's going to bring back taxpayer-funded abortions and force Catholic hospitals to perform sex change operations. So I shouldn't be too surprised that his call for unity are a bit hollow. My only question for our Catholic president is, are you going to sue the nuns again for a third time? True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, listen to our president the other day talk about what he's going to do with people from other countries. This is really disturbing stuff here. Trigger warning, listen.
In light of the new COVID variants that you're learning about, we're instituting now a new measure for individuals flying into the United States from other countries. In addition to wearing masks, everyone flying to the United States from another country will need to test before they get on that plane, before they depart, and quarantine when they arrive in America.
Wow. That's so he's saying that people from other countries are diseased? That is so xenophobic. I am literally shaking right now that he would say, so he's saying our president, our xenophobic president is saying that brown people are diseased and are not allowed in this country. Wow. I can't believe that this is America. That this is Joe Biden's America. That we would live in a country that thinks that black and brown people are sick and diseased. I'm literally shaking right now. And I'm reminded of this tweet. I saw this tweet a couple months back. Banning all travel from Europe or any other part of the world will not stop it. And that tweet was from Joe Biden. Joe Biden. But that was different because Trump was the one who wanted to do it. And that when Trump did it, it was racist, xenophobic, and horrible. But when Biden wants to do it, it's righteous and beautiful, and he has a plan. I got one more point to make about unity. Is this unity thing that we're calling for, is that even good? Is unity even a good thing? Let's add a little nuance to this. So the question, so if you're not going to unify, again, the last segment, right? If you're not going to unify around God, what are we going to unify around? Unify around what? That's the question. I am haunted by this map. I saw this map like a week or two ago, and I can't stop thinking about it. Okay, so this is Germany. Red, I can't see the thing. I think red's Catholic. Yeah. So red is Catholic. Blue is Protestant. And then obviously darker red are the areas that are more Catholic, lighter red, less Catholic, but still prominently Catholic and blue, right? The black is atheist. That's all of East Germany. And that yellow line is the wall, the former wall between East and West Germany. All of East Germany is atheist. Isn't that amazing? Still today. You know, on this show all the time, we talk about how politics is downstream of culture. So when I say that, I think of it like a mountain, right? So culture is at the top of the mountain, and everything that comes out of culture comes downstream and affects politics that are down here, right? And so many people focus on the politics and ignore the culture. And we try to focus almost all of our attention on the culture first, right? So you got to change culture if you want to change it, right? But in this case, politics so poisoned and polluted the waters of East Germany that still today, half a century later, it's a completely atheist part of the same country. The wall's torn down. The Soviets are no longer in charge of it. But still today, it's an atheist block of the country. Communism killed God in Eastern Germany, just like the Marxists wanted. That's amazing. So that's an example of actually culture being downstream of politics, which is interesting. But the reason I bring it up here is, guys, can you pop the map back up again? When I look at this map in East Germany, you know what I see? Unity. I see perfect, harmonious unity. Here's the problem with this drive for unity. When we hear about it, right? If you can't unite around first principles, then the only thing you can unite around is policy. But I don't want to unify around policy. I don't want to unify around your abortion policy, because that's how it always goes, right? It's like, all right, everyone, all right, let's have some unity here. You start agreeing with me. Let's unify around me, everyone. Come on, let's unify already. That's what it always is. I don't want to unify around your policy. David Harsanyi had a great argument. He said, unity is found in comedy with your neighbors, in your churches and schools. By the way, that is a super old picture of David Harsanyi. He would laugh at that picture. Next time we talk to David Harsanyi, we got to show him the picture that we're using when we quote him. It's for your churches and schools and your everyday interactions in your community. Politics is not a place for unity. Oh, it's such a good line. Politics is not a place for unity. It's a place for airing grievances, right? Politics is where you have disunity. Politics is where you say, you're pro-abortion, you're pro-choice, or pro-life, whatever, we talk it out. That's what politics is. Politics isn't everyone shut up and agree with me. So here's what happens. If you can't unify around principles, which we're not, and if you can't unify around policy, which I don't want to, the only thing we're left is, and neither do they, by the way, they don't want to unify with my policies, so no one wants to, nor should we, right? The only thing left is silencing the opposition. If you can't unify around principles, If you can't, then you're going to unify around policy. And if you're not going to unify around policy, then all that's left is silencing the opposition. And that's what we're seeing right now. This is Alex Berenson. He says, the 5 stages of woke debating. Your ideas are evil. You are evil. I will no longer talk to you. You're not allowed to talk to me. You're not allowed to talk to anyone. And of course, they call it holding people accountable, not cancel culture, right? That's what they say. Oh, we got to hold people accountable. We got to hold Trump supporters accountable. We got to hold these white supremacists accountable. That's what they say. They don't call cancel culture. It sounds too mean. They're not canceling people. Well, people anyway. They're not canceling people. They're canceling terrorists. Because we need unity. Let me share this story quick. So Theodore Dalrymple. I love Theodore Dalrymple. He's one of my all-time favorite writers. You have to read Life at the Bottom. It is such a stinking good book. I love it. Read Life at the Bottom. I want to quote Second Opinion, though, a different book of his. And the reason I never want to share Theodore, or I'm hesitant to share Theodore Dalrymple stories on the show because if I ever read from him, like on the air, I can't stop. There's no good place to stop. So I'm liable to read an entire chapter on the show here. He's a doctor in the slums of England and in the worst prisons in England, right? So he deals with the lowest class of society, which are people, to put it nicely, only act with emotion and never with logic or reason or their brain. And that's putting it all very, very nicely. So he has this little section in his book called, in Second Opinion, about social justice. And he says, social justice sounds like the most noble concept in the world. He said, every single young idealist person in the world is in favor of social justice. Right? They thirst, young people especially thirst for a world free of historical injustices and have this fervent desire for goodwill towards men. And he shares an example of this in action and what this fervency looks like in real life. And he tells the story of a 17-year-old girl who came to his hospital and she was punched in the eye by a 16-year-old boy who she said robbed her friend. And the boy didn't like that accusation. He didn't like that he was being accused of robbing her friend, even though he did. But this girl also had another issue. She was really smart. And that's not allowed. And she passed all of her exams. No one else passed their exams. So as a reward, her dad bought her some new sneakers. Right? Great job passing the exam. Here's some new sneakers. Here's Dalrymple. The possession of these deeply desirable sneakers was an affront to the delicate sense of social justice of the youths of her age who lived near her, who saw no reason why she should have them, and they should not. It was only natural, therefore, that they should express their outrage at this inequality and inequity by seizing her in the street and trying to set her on fire. Not until every youth in the slum had these sneakers, when of course they would cease to be desirable, would they desist from their righteous persecution of her. He said, when there's perfect justice in the world, when there's true equality of outcome, then tragedy will be no more, we're told. Jealousy will be extinguished from the hearts of humans because the very concept of personal possessions will disappear as well. Hooray for communism. Hooray for unity. Communism is the only logical end to social justice. Right? You're upset about the lack of social justice? You want to get to the root of it? Take away everyone's possessions. No more possessions is the only solution. That's true equality. That's true unity, isn't it? And it's such an interesting path to get here, just to tie all this together. So first we got rid of God, and we tried to fill that void with things. And then when we don't have enough things, or when someone else has more things than I have, then we force the government to get rid of all the things. And then you're left with no spiritual wealth or material wealth. You're just dead inside. And your society is dead, and your culture is dead, and every person is dead inside. Just ask everyone who's ever lived in a communist country. They have no spiritual wealth, they have no material wealth. They have no treasure on earth or in heaven. But they have so much justice and so much unity. Just like East Germany. So we could have unity in America, sure. But at what cost? Coming up next, I want to talk about California's opening up. It's a miracle. It's an election miracle. What a bunch of hackery, Gavin Newsom and the rest, a bunch of other Democrats across the state when it comes to COVID. And what they did to you and their states and this country to stick it to Trump. It is disgusting. We'll talk about that next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Well, I'll tell you, it's just been a miraculous week in COVID land. Right now, the Biden's become president. DC's opened up their restaurants. The Michigan governor's opened up. The mayor of Chicago, the mayor of New York City. Gotta say, we gotta go. We gotta open up, everyone. Gavin Newsom, maybe worst of all. Gavin Newsom shut down California because the ICU capacity was under 15%. And today, literally today, he's opening California back up, even though the ICU capacity is still under 15%. So people are like, well, what gives? And he says, well, we are not going to release the data that we're using to make our decisions because it will confuse the public. And now the WHO comes out and says that we need to consider cycle thresholds, which is something we've been saying for months. And because of that, watch the cases drop about 90% once cycle thresholds are considered. Listen, I don't want to tell you what to think, but one could feel pretty outraged and feel like a chump that so many people would cause so much harm to the country for so long just to make Trump look bad. But don't worry, Biden to the rescue. Here's Joe Biden the other day.
If we fail to act, there will be a wave of evictions and foreclosures in the coming months as this pandemic rages on, because there's nothing we can do to change the trajectory of the pandemic in the next several months.
For a year, you've been saying, elect me, and I will change the trajectory of the pandemic. Nan Hayworth is here. She's the first female medical doctor to serve in Congress, and she's at the board member at the Independent Women's Forum. Nan, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Mike,
glad to talk to you. Good to talk to you, Doctor. What is, do you think, the most egregious politicization of this last year or last week even?
There are so many aspects, but what really infuriates me and saddens me the most is the lockdowns, because they have known, Mike, and you talk all the time about the science of COVID. It is known that lockdowns cause holistic damage to public health, to the economy, which also affects, obviously, public health, mental health, psychological health, undiagnosed and untreated diseases, undiagnosed and unremedied child abuse because children are not in school. We have lost a full year now, and more really, because it spans 2 years of children's education because of teachers' unions insisting on their side of this, that they not work in person. This is a terrible tragedy. It is. It is self-induced for the United States, but obviously seems to be highly politicized, entirely politicized, because Illinois, California, Michigan, all of a sudden, miraculously, they can. Governor Cuomo in New York's talked about now. Miraculously, we can open up. Why could that not have been done months and months ago when it was already known statistically that lockdowns cause more harm than good?
What do you think of Newsom in the state of California saying we're not going to release the data to the public because they wouldn't understand it? How do you look at that as a doctor, too?
Yeah.
What should be released and what not?
Well, it's ridiculous on several levels. Mike, obviously, if the algorithms are confusing, then introduce the data, which in fact, I think taxpayers, frankly, are entitled to the data. Obviously, it has to be de-identified for confidentiality reasons. We get that. But beyond that, taxpayers have paid to collect these data and paid to analyze them, release them, be transparent. Maybe some better brains can look at your algorithms and your analyses and give you more actionable, effectively, healing and life-saving information. This is, again, another outrage that Californians have been subjected to because they have, unfortunately, voted for people who don't have their best interests at heart.
No, I think that's been proven. As a doctor, so we say all the time, Thomas Sowell's line is that there's no such thing as solutions, there's only trade-offs. So you as a doctor, you're in the trade-off game all day long, all the time, right? When you're prescribing medicine or whatever it is, you're always considering trade-offs. Why don't more people consider trade-offs when making decisions?
Well, right, the risk-benefit equation. And Thomas Sowell's exactly right, of course, as he always is. But economics, Henry Hazlitt said this in his own way. Economics is the science and the intuition, if you will, of anticipating the consequences, the adverse consequences that otherwise, are unintentional, right? So risks and benefits are always part of this equation. The more information we have, the better we can make that assessment. And the public needs to do it too, Mike. They need to have the best information in a form that they can digest, that respects their intelligence, but presents it in forms that lay people can understand. That's the only way you can effectively make decisions. We today have an American public that's really divided in half among those who only hear what we should fear in terms of the virus, and that's been exploited politically, obviously, and those who understand that life does entail risk, and that we are losing economically, in terms of public health, in terms of individual health, mental, physical, societal, you name it, because of the extreme measures that have been taken to try to control one variable. You never run a society on one variable, that variable being COVID-19, and even that hasn't been controlled by these lockdowns. So it's a lose, lose, lose.
Maybe you can do one variable for 2 weeks, which is why I think a lot of people signed up for the 2 weeks to stop the spread, right? But you can't do one variable for 2 years.
No.
Just on that point too, I think about kids and the psychological effect of kids now. Seeing people wearing masks only, like not communicating with people face to face and seeing faces and learning that emotional intelligence and being scared to go outside. And that's going to have a generational consequence, right?
No question, Mike, and what a great observation. I was thinking the same thing, probably about 2 weeks ago. I was looking and saying these, especially very young children, not seeing those, and infants, not seeing those facial cues. When I was a baby, just a personal story, when I was a baby, my mother had a cold when I was a newborn, and her doctor told her to wear a mask. We have a picture of me looking at my mother, and I've got this expression. I was a days-old baby. I have this expression of terror on my face. And for years, and ironically, I became an ophthalmologist. For years, I was terrified of images of eyes. Don't know if it had anything to do with it, but we are conditioned, no question, to respond to a whole face. The mouth, the lower face expression is very important. This too is an enormous problem, and probably much more of one than it should be.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, we got to run, but I'm worried about groupthink as well, and all these different boards. Why in every state? Why doesn't the governor of New York or California or Michigan or wherever have a Dr. Nan Hayworth, you or someone like you, giving a different opinion on this stuff?
Yeah, well, number one, I'm a Republican. So it really, truly, these states are pretty heavily politicized. When I left Congress, I had friends who tried to sort of introduce me to, various people in the know in the state power structure, and it's just really tough when you're of the opposite party in states like this. It's not the easiest thing. So that's part of it, and I think also though the public health establishment is also in and of itself, as is most of medicine these days, very left-leaning. And you could see that in the lenience that they allowed toward the protesters / rioters throughout the summer, while other group gatherings outdoors were strictly prohibited. And the virus doesn't respect politics. So unfortunately, institutionally, as we all know, academia has become dominated by the left. Mike Gonzalez has written of it very persuasively in The Plot to Change America. And we now see the fruits of that in every respect. And it is amazing to me that alumni of yours and my eminent Ivy League alma maters cannot understand this. And cannot understand the parochialization, the blinkered thinking. It's mind-boggling. We've raised generations of drones.
and if the left has taken over every institution in America, which I think they have, why would medicine not be one of those as well? Of course it is. Dr. Nan Hayworth, first female medical doctor to serve as a member of Congress, and she's at the Independent Women's Forum. Dr. Hayworth, wonderful to talk to you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mike. Anytime.
Have a great day. Let's get to some more science of COVID, and particularly the vaccines and the latest and the strains. And my mom got the Moderna vaccine yesterday, so we'll talk about side effects, et cetera. We'll do that next with Professor Vincent Racaniello. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So my mom got the vaccine yesterday. She got the first dose of the vaccine. So I got a ton of questions for our professor of virology. He's the professor of virology at Columbia University. That's his main job. Secondarily known as our professor here on the Mike Slater Show. And he has his podcast, microbe.tv, This Week in Virology. Professor, hello, sir.
Morning again.
You've also turned into like our family physician. Like my mom's like, call the professor. What does the professor think about this? Let's talk about the Moderna vaccine. So she got it and it was great and no problems whatsoever.
Great, good to hear.
What other interesting things do we need to know about the Moderna vaccine?
Well, she's going to get a booster in a couple of weeks, right? And she may have a more severe reaction, more pain at the injection site, maybe even some fever, malaise. That's completely normal because the second shot is reviving the memory by the first shot. And then, she's good to go, and that's great. The question still remains. There are two really important questions, whether the vaccinations will prevent you from being infected again. They will certainly prevent disease, but will they prevent you from being infected? And really now the key question that has arisen in the past week, will these vaccines be protective against some of these variants that are arising in parts of the world? In particular, the South African variant seems to be somewhat problematic. And today Moderna announced it's going to modify its vaccine to accommodate the South African variant, which is great news.
Wow. Okay. So it feels like you've been more hopeful about those questions in the past. Are you still hopeful?
I am, yes. So the UK variant and the South American variant, they seem to be covered by the vaccines and by previous infection. And it's just the South African one. Some data came out in the past week since I talked to you last, and it suggests that immunity from the vaccine or from natural infection is not as good at blocking infection with that variant. And we didn't know that the last time I talked, but I think I said to you, look, even if it's a problem, we can remake the vaccine really quickly, and that's exactly what Moderna is doing. So I don't have a problem. I think it's all fine.
Wow. Are we ever going to get to a point where we can be kind of, I don't want to say even ahead, but like alongside these variants where they won't spread change so quickly?
Sure. At some point, a lot of people globally are going to be vaccinated, and it'll be sort of like an influenza situation where maybe we have to get a vaccine every year, and they look at the circulating viruses and say, do we need to change the vaccine or not? That's routine with influenza, and it's not an issue. So I think we'll be fine. Not worried about it.
Yeah, so right now it's just because it's spreading so much, it's changing a lot, and that's why it feels like every week there's a new variant.
Exactly.
Okay. That's good. What is, and please do this again, the difference between whether or not you can get infected versus diseased?
Right. So, the way you get SARS-CoV-2, the virus, you inhale it in droplets that someone else has expelled, right? Those droplets go in your nose, and the viruses in the droplets start to reproduce in the cells in your respiratory tract. That's infection. A lot of people can get infected, but they don't get sick. We call them asymptomatic, right? So disease, or what you feel, symptoms or signs, that's a separate thing from being infected. The virus can get in you and reproduce. And I know this is counterintuitive for a lot of people to think, how can a virus get in you and multiply and not make you sick? It happens a lot. So you can get infected, you can make virus, you can actually shed it, and you won't be sick. And so we want to know if the vaccines prevent infection. We know they prevent disease, and that's great. So people are not going to die. But do they prevent transmission? I think they will, but we have to find out.
When will we know that? When will we get enough data?
All right, so there's some data out of Israel already. They have amazingly vaccinated more of their population than any other country, and they claim they're starting to see an inhibition of shedding from people. So in other words, they say that people who are vaccinated are about 30% less likely to get infected, not disease now, just infected, than non-immunized. So those data are starting to come out, and then the Moderna and Pfizer are both doing trials to measure it. So we should know in the next couple of months. Meanwhile, more and more people are going to get vaccinated, and that's going to help the situation.
Yeah, months is annoying. So one of my questions is going to be, what do we know about the immunity? But that's not even the right question, because it depends what people mean by immunity, right? So one of my friends, they got it, right? The husband and wife, they both got it. So they're like, oh, we're immune now. How long are you immune if you get it naturally?
Yeah.
Versus the vaccine. But then the question is, again, immune from what? Getting it again, or being infected, or being diseased?
Two very good questions, okay? First of all, immunity, yes, you have to specify whether you mean infection or disease. And for example, polio vaccines, which everyone gets, they prevent polio, but you still can get infected with virus and shed it, all right? But nobody thinks about it because there's no consequence. So in this case, we know the vaccines prevent disease. That's how they've been tested. Whether they prevent infection is not known. So that's why immunity so far means against disease. Now, natural infection, you have immunity against disease, all right? Whether you have immunity to reinfection, we'll find out, as we have just said. How long it lasts is another good question. There have been some more studies already over the previous month or two, which suggest that it could last a few years. Immunity against disease. We don't know, again, about infection. But of course, if the virus changes, which it seems to be doing, right, that was not going to last forever anymore. You're going to have to get re-immunized. So it's a moving target right now, unfortunately.
Okay. There's a school in Fairfax, Virginia, and they said they don't want to go back until all the kids are vaccinated, which is like, whoa, I haven't even thought about kids getting vaccinated. What would it take for us to get to that point, and do you think that's even necessary?
All right, so Moderna has said they're testing their vaccines in kids. The problem is that when they tested their vaccine, it was in 18-year-olds and up, right? So anyone less than 18 cannot get the vaccine. That's the way the FDA works. You can only give a vaccine to people in an age group where it's been tested. Moderna has said they're checking it in younger kids, but they're not going to know the results until 2022, okay? However, your other question, is it necessary? Probably not. If you vaccinate all the 18 and up, you're really going to cut down on disease in them, hopefully transmission, again, that we don't know. And then that will avoid the young kids from getting infected. But as you know, also, young kids get disease far less frequently. They get infected, but they often do not get disease. So I think it's okay to have them go back to school and not be vaccinated for now.
Okay. Why would scientifically it be different between someone over 18 versus someone under 18?
There isn't a scientific reason. It's just traditionally the way clinical trials have always been done. In adults, they can consent. They can say, yeah, I understand the risks and I'm happy to get this vaccine, and that's part of it. But obviously, from 18 down, there's a lot of range in what kids are able to consent to. But really, there's no reason why you can't include kids in vaccine trials. Absolutely not.
Going into the hospital now, what is my new favorite word? Bamlanivimab. That was somewhat close. What is this thing?
Bam Bam. Bam Bam is a monoclonal antibody. So what's a monoclonal antibody? But, when you get infected with viruses, you make antibodies, and that's one way your immune system fights them. Well, we can make these antibodies in the lab, and we can make them against a very specific part of the virus, in fact, the spike. And we call those monoclonal because they're against one very specific part of the spike. So those have been made by a number of companies. The ones made by Lilly and Regeneron have EUA authorizations from the FDA, and they can be used. The problem is they have to be given intravenously, right? So that's been traditionally in a hospital setting, but now we're realizing, if people are in a hospital and very sick already, the monoclonals don't help very much, because in that part of the disease, the virus levels are very low. And so this is an antiviral and it's not so useful. So now the push is to try and get this into people. Say you have a positive test and you're not that sick yet you're in some at-risk group, high-risk group, old age, other diseases. Then they will bring you to an infusion center. They're setting up these infusion centers across the country where you can go in and get your infusion. It's not a hospital, right? But you can go and you need to have 2 hours for the infusion, and then you have to wait an hour to make sure there are no side effects. So they're starting to, build that capacity up, and maybe that'll make an impact.
Oh, that's very good. Okay, so let me make sense of this. So here in San Diego, Petco Park, our baseball stadium, you go down. No, that's to get the vaccine. So I guess you could get tested anywhere, right? So you get tested somewhere. Oh, you have it, and you're 50 years old with known heart problems. So you're high risk, right? You should go over to this other place, and we're going to give you this medicine here that will treat you before it gets really bad and you need to go to the hospital. Is that right?
Absolutely. Perfect. You got it. Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. That's wonderful news. Okay, on that point, okay, let's go back a little bit to the vaccine too. So is it difficult to administer this vaccine, right? Like, does it take someone of a very high medical threshold in order to do that? / how easy is it to administer? And can we just be doing it like in grocery stores, easier, it's more prevalently?
Okay, so it's a intramuscular shot, and it's a long needle. It goes pretty deep, okay? So you need someone who knows how to do it and not hit the bone, right? Because that's terrible if you do that. So it does require skill, and typically, not just physicians, but nurses and nurses' assistants, physicians' assistants. At my university, they want to get veterinarians to help because they know how to give immunizations. But the real issue is, that's one issue. The other is, after you get it, you have to wait for 15 minutes. So you can't just do it in a CVS at big scale, because they don't have room for people to sit for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, right? I got my vaccine last week at a local college, and they put us in the gymnasium, spaced apart for 15 minutes. It's a perfect venue to do that. But CVS, local drugstores, doctors' offices, it's a problem because there's nowhere to put people to watch them for those 15 minutes.
Yes, interesting. What a bummer that it's not as easy as like an EpiPen or something, right? Where you just go, and then on your way.
Would be great. And the other thing, Mike, is in places like New York, people are lining up outside in freezing weather, and you have an 80-year-old person waiting 2 hours in freezing weather. It's not a good idea. They're going to get sick.
No. One last question about the vaccine. So if my mom, because it's hard to get appointments, as you talked about. So my mom got the one. Let's say she can't get another one for like 4 months for whatever reason. What do you think, how safe is she now, or how?
Right. So this is going to happen with a lot of people because the supplies are running out, and we're not going to be able to get that second shot in, within the weeks that it's supposed to be. I would say people who have the first shot and haven't got the second yet, and it's starting to get beyond the designated time for the booster, you have to be careful. Stay home as much as you can, mask, distance, and all of that until you can get it. You may have some protection after the first shot. We don't really know for sure. So I would say just be careful. It's not a game changer if you are late for that second shot. Okay, you can still get it and it will still have its effect.
This term here I don't quite understand. So California's last in administering the vaccines of the 50 states. And they use this term called usage rate. What is usage rate? Is that how many vaccines you have versus how many you've given?
Yes, because a lot of states, get an allocation. Every state gets an allocation based on their population, right? And then how many do you actually put in arms? So New York State is putting 75% of what they have in arms. And that's not good. Why not get them all in arms, right? And part of the problem is they're holding some back for second shots. But we should probably just go ahead and immunize as many people as possible. So yes, you're right.
California's 38%.
Yeah, that's not good. It's not good
it's
at all.
Brutal. We got to run, but I really, really wanted to ask you why people are losing their sense of taste and smell. Maybe next week we can do a longer analysis of this, but I've talked to people who obviously they can't taste anything. And I was like, well, that's horrible, but you can also game it and you can just like drink kale smoothies all day and like get really super healthy because it doesn't matter because you don't taste anything anyway.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
what can you give us the very brief of the science? And are there any other diseases that have you lose your sense of taste?
Yeah, so taste and smell are linked together, and the smell receptors are in your upper tract over your nose. There's what's called the olfactory epithelium that has nerves in it that sense things. And the problem is the virus goes around there and multiplies and destroys the cells, and you can't smell. And other viruses do this. It's not just SARS-CoV-2 influenza viruses. Common cold viruses can do the same thing. But usually it's reversible, and you get back your sense of smell and taste. So you lose your sense of smell, and you can't taste because the two are so linked. That's part of the problem. And so with SARS-CoV-2, what's weird is that many people don't recover it for long periods of time. And that's the problem, and we don't know if it's going to come back or not. So that's why people are upset, because taste is really and smell are really important. If you can't taste your food, it's really not fun to eat, right?
No. How scary would that be? It's like, I'll never taste again. I would definitely fall down that pit really quickly. Professor, you're wonderful. Thanks for your wealth of information.
Thank you. Pleasure as always. Take care.
My mom will take great comfort in it as well. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.